I always thought I had a good sense for people. 46 years on this earth, a few heartbreaks, a handful of lessons, and I prided myself on knowing when someone was sincere and when they were full of it. So when he gave me that ring, I didn't hesitate. I slipped it on, smiling because it wasn't just any ring. It was his mother's ring, he told me, a family heirloom. It belonged to my mom, he had said, that familiar glint in his eyes I thought was love, reverence, maybe even devotion. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I wanted us to be that couple, the kind everyone looks at and says, they're perfect together. I imagined engagement photos, a small ceremony, laughter echoing through our families, a life carefully stitched together like a quilt. I allowed myself to imagine it, and I trusted him. Weeks passed. Weeks that felt like the calm before a storm I didn't know was brewing. He made casual jokes about our future home, the kind of housewarming parties we'd host, how he would carve my initials into some old tree in the backyard just to make me smile. I smiled back, oblivious. I trusted. And then it happened. On a Wednesday that began like any other. I was on my lunch break, scrolling through Facebook with my usual casual half-interest in news articles, the latest memes, the inevitable political arguments I'd rather scroll past than engage in. My phone buzzed with notifications, and somewhere, between a friend tagging another friend in some ridiculous cat video and a cousin's post about their kid's school play, I saw him. My heart stopped. It was him, smiling, arms slung over the shoulders of a woman whose face I didn't recognize at first. Their laughter seemed intimate, like private music that I had no business hearing. And then my eyes caught it. The ring. My ring. Or at least the same twisted, delicate gold band with the tiny sapphire that he told me belonged to his mother. My chest felt as though someone had taken a steel band and wrapped it around it. My stomach churned violently. It took me a moment. I blinked. I pinched myself. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe my eyes had betrayed me. But there it was again, clearer this time, in their carefully posed engagement photo. The kind you see on Facebook and think this is happiness. Except it wasn't happiness. It was betrayal, wrapped neatly in smiles and hashtags, the cruelest kind of irony I'd ever encountered. I scrolled back to the start of the post, desperately hoping for some explanation in the comments. Maybe he was wearing the same ring by coincidence? Maybe she was his cousin or his sister, and I'd misunderstood something. My mind clawed at anything that would make sense. But the more I looked, the more the truth settled in like a storm cloud overhead. This woman wasn't a relative. This was her. She was the one he had been lying about, fabricating a story about a late mom's ring, just to keep me calm, to keep me unsuspecting while he led a double life right under my nose. I dropped my phone. My hands were shaking so violently I couldn't even pick it back up immediately. I felt my knees weaken. For a moment, I sat there, stunned, trying to reconcile the image on the screen with the man I thought I knew. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let myself believe that he was sincere, that he loved me, that we were building a future together? Anger came next. Hot, sharp, curling in my chest like fire. My mind raced with all the little lies he had told me. The stories about his mother, the moments he spent visiting family, when he was really with her, the casual reassurances that everything was fine. I could see it all clearly now, the subtle manipulations, the careful omissions. Everything had been a performance. Everything had been a lie. Denial tried to creep back in. Maybe it's not what it seems. Maybe there's an explanation. But deep down I knew better. I had learned enough about people, about myself, to know the difference between coincidence and deception. I had learned that sometimes the truth is ugly, and no amount of wishing or hoping could make it prettier. I found myself going through the mental catalog of our last few months together. The ring, the dinners, the small gestures he had made. I remembered him saying, with that infuriating charm, "I only want you to have it. It's yours now." And I had believed him, gladly, wholeheartedly. Foolishly. Naively. Tears came, yes. Anguish, heartbreak, disbelief. But underneath all of that, there was a spark. A spark of resolve that started small, almost imperceptible at first, but growing rapidly into something fierce. I wasn't going to cry myself into oblivion. I wasn't going to stew in betrayal and let him think he could get away with it. No, I would not be a victim. Not this time. The fire in my chest began to shape itself into a plan, even as my mind continued to reel. I would show him. I would let him see that underestimating me had been his gravest mistake. Not out of malice, necessarily, but because the truth deserves to be seen, and the consequences of betrayal need to be felt. I remembered the way he laughed when I trusted him, the way he smiled when I believed him, and I realized how little he had understood about me all along. I wasn't a woman who would shrink quietly into heartbreak. I was someone who noticed, who remembered, who calculated. And now he would learn the hard way. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at the screen, feeling the storm inside me settle into a cold, determined calm. My plan wasn't fully formed yet. I had to gather details, I had to wait for the right moment. But the direction was clear. The engagement, the lies, the betrayal. It all pointed to one inevitable conclusion. He would pay, not in the way he expected, but in the only way that mattered. I slipped the ring off my finger. I stared at it for a long time. There was no sentimentality left, no longing, no warmth. Only the cold realization that this object, this supposed symbol of love, had been a weapon in his deceit. I could throw it away, sell it, hide it. But no, it was mine to use if I wanted. Not in the way he thought, but as a reminder of his arrogance, his blindness, his utter failure to see me for who I truly was. By the time the afternoon sun had shifted across my living room, painting everything in a golden, almost mocking glow, I had made a decision. I would not weep, I would not plead, and I would not forgive, not yet. Not until he understood fully the weight of his choices. The woman he had shown the ring to in his lies would not matter to me. The ring itself would not matter to me. What mattered was reclaiming my power, my dignity, and my peace of mind. He had underestimated me from the start. And now, slowly but surely, he would learn that a woman scorned does not crumble quietly. She rises. She plans. She acts. I picked up my phone again, my hands steady this time. I didn't scroll social media. I didn't call anyone. I didn't let anyone see my anger or my grief. Instead, I started making mental notes, small observations that would later become tools in my plan. The way he smiled, the subtle tells in his photos, the way he talked about her behind his careful mask with me. Every detail mattered, and I would remember it all. By the end of that day, I was no longer the woman who believed in his story. I was the woman who would write the ending, and I could almost hear the faint echo of a warning in my own mind. Be careful what you lie about, because the next time you think you're in control, you won't be. Because this was no longer just about a ring. This was about the truth, and I was going to make sure he never forgot it. The morning after I saw the ring on her finger, I didn't sleep. Not a wink. My thoughts were like a swarm of bees, buzzing around every lie he'd ever told me, every word he'd whispered that I'd taken at face value. By the time the sun crept over the horizon, I knew I couldn't just sit there and stew. I needed to know everything, the truth, the full story, the depth of his deception. I started quietly, methodically. First, social media. I didn't want anyone knowing what I was up to. Not friends, not family, not even him. I logged into Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, every platform he had a presence on, and I went through it like a detective. My heart ached with every photo of him smiling at her, every comment she left, every like he returned. I noticed patterns. Certain nights when he said he was working late, she was posting pictures of them at restaurants, at bars, at places he'd sworn he'd never been. The ring, of course, always there. Shining, mocking, a constant reminder of his lies. I started looking closer, analyzing his friends and connections. Mutual friends that I had thought were harmless seemed to know more than they should. I found photos tagged months ago, vacation pictures, coffee dates, even a birthday celebration, all of which he had never mentioned. All while he was telling me he was busy with work or spending time with family. The inconsistencies piled up, each one like a brick in a wall he was building to hide the truth. Next, I moved on to messages. I told myself I wouldn't snoop, but curiosity and a growing need for confirmation outweighed any moral hesitation. I needed facts. I needed proof. I went through old text messages, emails, even the occasional note left in his phone. At first, I hesitated at some messages. They were fleeting, casual, almost dismissible. But then I found them. The texts between him and her, full of endearments, jokes, intimate plans. Plans that didn't include me. Plans that had been whispered behind my back. Plans that shattered every illusion of trust I'd ever had in him. My anger boiled silently beneath the surface as I read each message. But I didn't let it control me. Not yet. This wasn't about yelling, crying, or confrontation. This was about gathering information, observation, strategy. I needed the full map of his deceit before I struck. As I dug deeper, I noticed something curious. He wasn't subtle. He thought he was careful, but he left patterns behind, footprints he didn't realize I would follow. Every lie had a thread, every excuse a weakness. And with each discovery, my plan started taking shape in my mind. He had underestimated me, assuming I would be blind, naive, easy to manipulate. He didn't know the woman he was dealing with. He had no idea that I could see through smoke and mirrors. I started documenting everything, mentally at first, then physically. Notes, dates, inconsistencies, times, locations. I didn't need to rush. The more thorough I was, the more impact it would have when the time came. And I realized something else. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my pride, my sense of self. I wasn't going to be a footnote in his story. I was going to write my own ending, and he would be forced to read it. The day blurred into night as I continued my investigation. I made lists, timelines, and cross-references. Each message, each social media post, each photo added pieces to a puzzle that had been hidden from me for months. It was exhausting work, both mentally and emotionally. But I felt a growing sense of control, a rare clarity in the storm of betrayal that had consumed me. It was during one of those late-night sessions that I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. A comment on a mutual friend's post, seemingly harmless, but it mentioned our favorite spot last weekend. I recognized it immediately. It was the bar where he'd told me he had to work late that night. He wasn't working late. He was with her. And just like that, my understanding of him shifted yet again. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a one-time lapse. This was ongoing. I felt a flash of fear, not for myself, but for the audacity of his lies. How long had he been weaving this web? How many nights had he gone home to me, kissed me, whispered promises, while simultaneously building a life with someone else? I shivered at the thought. And yet, underneath that fear, my resolve hardened. I wouldn't let him get away with it. Not this time. The next step was gathering corroboration. I reached out to friends, carefully, cautiously, subtly. I didn't reveal my suspicions outright. I asked questions, dropped hints, and listened. People talked. They always do. And soon, I had more pieces of the puzzle. Sightings, observations, little stories that confirmed everything I had already suspected. It was during one of these conversations that I realized something crucial. He had lied not just to me, but to everyone. His charm, his stories, his rehearsed demeanor. It was a performance designed to manipulate, to control, to maintain an image of himself that didn't exist. And that image, carefully constructed, was about to come crashing down. As the evidence piled up, my anger grew, yes, but so did my admiration for myself. I was methodical, precise, and patient. I wasn't letting my emotions run unchecked. I was channeling them into strategy. Every lie I uncovered, every betrayal I documented, made me stronger, sharper. He had assumed weakness, and instead he had unearthed the opposite. Late one night, I sat back and looked at my notes, my timelines, my screenshots, and my carefully compiled proof. The full picture was clear now. He had been cheating consistently, manipulating situations, and lying about his late mom's ring to keep me blind. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. The man I loved, the man I trusted, had been deceiving me in every possible way. And yet, despite the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the anger, I felt alive, empowered. I had clarity where there had once been naivety. I had strategy where there had once been trust. And most importantly, I had choice. I could let this destroy me, or I could turn it into something that would leave him reeling, something that would make him understand, once and for all, that underestimating me was his biggest mistake. By the end of that week, I had a comprehensive dossier. Screenshots, timelines, cross-referenced events, and enough proof to make anyone understand the depth of his deception. I didn't share it with anyone yet. That would come later, at the right moment. Right now it was mine, my power, my leverage, my quiet satisfaction. I realized something as I put the finishing touches on my notes. He thought he was clever. He thought he had orchestrated everything perfectly. But he hadn't accounted for one thing, me. I had the patience, the intelligence, and the focus to see through it all. I had the ability to wait, to observe, to plan. And when the time came, the unveiling would be devastating. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. I was angry, yes. I was hurt, absolutely. But I was also clear, focused, and ready. The discovery phase had ended, and now the planning would begin. The pieces were in place, the truth was in my hands, and the only thing left was to determine how I would strike. And I knew one thing for certain. When I was finished, he wouldn't see it coming. Not in a million years. Because this wasn't just about a ring, or a lie, or a woman who thought she knew her man. This was about proving, to him and to myself, that I was not someone to be underestimated. That the woman he deceived was not fragile, not blind, not helpless. She was intelligent, she was capable, and she was about to show him exactly what happens when you cross her. And the best part, he would never forget it. There's a certain kind of calm that comes after the storm of discovery. Less the fragile kind that cracks at the first whisper. More the steel-cold calm of someone who has charted the map of betrayal and now decides how to walk it. That was me. The evidence sat in my phone like a loaded deck. Screenshots, timelines, tagged photos, messages. It was all there. Now I had to decide how to play it. I didn't want drama for drama's sake. I wanted clarity. I wanted consequences that fit the crime, and I wanted him to understand. Without doubt, that deception has a price. I thought about public spectacle, about blowing everything up on the feed like a viral confession, but there is a cheapness to chaos. I wanted precision. I wanted theater that felt inevitable, like watching a carefully constructed set finally reveal its trapdoor. So I started with the obvious. Audience. Who would him notice? Whose opinion did he value? Family, certain mutual friends. The ones who'd lift him up and make him feel untouchable. Those were my leverage points. I made a mental list. People whose perception of him mattered enough to wound his ego. Weddings and engagements are built on perceived honor and tradition. Those perceptions were what I would carefully dismantle. Step 1, containment. He had no idea I'd been cataloging his life. I left no digital footprints of my digging beyond what was necessary. Screenshots saved to an encrypted folder, a paper notebook stashed in the bottom drawer. You learn, at my age, to blend old-school caution with new-school tech. I didn't need anyone stumbling across my plan before it was ready. Step 2, allies. I don't have many people I would ask to pick a fight for me, but I do have a few who understand loyalty and truth. I reached out quietly, no melodramatic texts, no vengeful posts, just measured conversations. A friend from a book club who's sharp as a tack and not one to gossip. An old coworker who knew how to handle people without making scenes. A cousin who'd always been good at logistics. I explained, succinctly and without theatricality, what I had found. I asked for help with timing and presence, not emotional labor. They nodded with the kind of sympathy that translates to action. They promised to be where they needed to be, when they needed to be. Step 3, visibility. If you want someone to see the truth, you must give them a place to stand. I planned an audience of his peers and relatives, a handful of mutual friends, and a curated timeline that would be impossible to deny. But I didn't want to ambush him in a sob story. I wanted him to watch everything he'd built for himself collapse in front of people he valued. For that, timing was everything. The engagement photos. That's where it started, and that's where it would end, if I played my cards right. He was proud of those images. He'd shared them with a flourish, basked in the congratulations and heart emojis. People would remember that day. People would remember the woman with the ring. So I crafted my plan around a moment he'd least expect. A small engagement celebration he was planning to host for his family. Intimate, polite, the kind of event meant to affirm his good intentions. I didn't make a scene about crashing. I made a scene about revealing. I contacted a photographer, not to embarrass him with staged photos, but to ensure there was a professional witness of the truth. I explained, calm, composed, that I needed someone discreet to document an event. I didn't ask for specifics, and I didn't lie. Professionals have codes of conduct. Mine was to have someone present who could corroborate faces, dates, and a couple of carefully placed moments that would be part of the presentation I planned to make. The photographer agreed to be there for the receptive angle of the celebration, and more importantly, to document who arrived and who left when. I also prepared the physical proof. I printed photos, real glossy prints, and arranged them chronologically. There was the ring on my finger. There were the dates he'd claimed to be at work and the photos that proved otherwise. There were the messages with endearments and plans. Screenshots are easy to disparage in courtrooms, or at least to label edited. But a physical stack of images placed in front of witnesses is harder to dismiss. I labeled the timeline, not with vitriol, but with dates and little notes. where he said he was versus where he actually was. It felt clinical, like forensic work. That's what betrayal looks like when you remove the theatrics. A series of facts with a pattern. Next was social engineering, the part people imagine as cloak and dagger, but is really just the careful nudging of people into doing what you need them to do. I didn't hack accounts or break into doors. I called the restaurant where he claimed to have been on a certain Friday and asked about a reservation. The manager didn't remember him. He did remember the woman he'd been with because she'd left a scarf behind. Small things like that accumulated like snow. I called a mutual friend by accident and let a conversation drift toward the weekends. I asked about the woman in the photos without revealing that she, in fact, was the reason I called. People talk. Humans have a hard time holding information when it's handed to them like gossip that risks nothing. I was careful with ethics. There's a line between clever and cruel, and I made a point not to cross it. I wanted exposure, not character assassination. He'd made his choices. I would make mine. I wasn't going to ruin someone's life beyond the consequences he'd already earned for himself. I wanted him to be confronted with the truth of his actions in a setting that mattered to him. His family, his friends, his carefully curated image. Not to create collateral damage beyond the scope of his betrayal. There was a tactical element to timing, too. People are more forgiving when they feel rushed by emotion. I needed a moment when the audience was calm, when reflections happen and not just reactions. That meant choosing the middle of his celebration, not the start. Let him be comfortable. Let the smiling begin. Let the toast start. Then, when the room relaxed and everyone leaned toward the dessert course, I'd deliver the truth. My delivery would be public, yes, but composed. No shouting, no humiliation as entertainment. I would stand, ask for a moment respectfully, and present the timeline. Facts, dates, photos. The photographer would have corroborating shots. Friends I'd quietly aligned with would be present to back me up if necessary. The goal was cognitive dissonance. Watching people reconcile the man they thought they knew with the pattern of his actions. That reconciliation is humiliating in a way that private arguments aren't. Humiliation is not my objective. Truth is, but humiliation is often the inevitable consequence when someone's house of cards collapses. I also planned for his defense. People will always scramble for excuses. Anticipation is part of strategy. I drafted responses, calm, short, and pointed, to whatever he or his allies might fling at me. Here is what I found, I would say. Here are the dates. Here is the evidence. I practiced the words until they felt like muscle memory. I rehearsed the little pauses, the breaths, the steady calm that communicates control. The performance of composure is as important as the content. People trust the voice that doesn't tremble. At night, when the house was quiet, I lay awake testing scenarios. Would he deny? Apologize? Beg? My money was on denial at first, anger next, and then, for those who valued their image, the scramble. I wanted him to feel the scramble. I wanted him to see that his choices had consequences not just for his conscience, but for the narrative he'd crafted around himself. Even as I planned, there were moments of unexpected tenderness. Not toward him, but toward myself. I was teaching myself boundaries I hadn't known I could enforce. I was reminding myself that an engagement ring is not a contract on your dignity. It is, at best, a symbol, and symbols can be reclaimed or removed. I was practicing the reclamation. By the time everything was in place, friends nodded into the plan, the photographer confirmed, the prints laid out in the order I wanted them. The quiet I felt wasn't the hollow hush of resignation. It was the collected breath before a song breaks into chorus. I had mapped the moment with a cartographer's detail, knowing each alley and avenue that would lead to the truth. I tucked the little paper timeline back into my drawer that night, and I slept for the first time in days without waking in a panic. The planning was done. The rest was execution. I woke up the next morning feeling strangely light. There was still pain, of course. There was still the ache of being deceived. But the ache had a purpose now. It was the engine behind the plan. He had made his choices. I had made mine. And when the room was full of people who had only seen his smile and not the steps behind it, I would stand up and let the quiet reveal what his words had tried to bury. He would watch as the truth aligned itself in front of him, neat as proof, sharp as glass. Not revenge for revenge's sake, but a lesson in accountability. Because I was tired of being invisible in a man's story. I wanted my chapter to be the one that made him finally see what he'd done. I wanted him to understand that underestimating me was not only stupid, it was irreversible. I arrived early. Not too early, just enough to make sure everything was in place before he walked in, thinking the room was safe, that he was untouchable, that the world still moved according to his carefully curated illusions. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times, but nothing could truly prepare you for the electricity of anticipation when it becomes real. The house smelled faintly of flowers, the scent neutral and innocuous, designed to make the space welcoming, not suspicious. People were milling around, friends, family, a few colleagues. Everyone expecting an evening of polite conversation, laughter, toasts, the kind of light-hearted engagement party he loved to orchestrate. And there I was, standing on the perimeter, calm, composed, every movement deliberate. The evidence was tucked neatly in a folder in my bag. Printed photos, dates, messages, a timeline of lies he couldn't deny. He arrived in his usual fashion, confident, charming, oblivious. He smiled, shaking hands, hugging people, basking in the approval he expected. I could see it in his eyes, the same arrogance that had allowed him to deceive me for months, the belief that his performance was flawless, the ignorance of what was coming. I let him mingle for a few moments. Let the laughter wash over him. Let him believe that all was well, that his web of lies remained intact. Then, as the evening started to settle, I moved. I requested everyone's attention. Not aggressively, not loudly, but with that quiet authority that demands notice. Conversations died down. Heads turned. I felt the weight of the room shift toward me. He noticed immediately. There was a flicker in his eyes, a micro-expression of confusion, quickly masked by forced composure. I smiled, soft, controlled, almost imperceptible. I held up the folder, letting the visual cue settle. Everyone could see it. My intentions were clear even without words. "Can I have a moment?" I said, voice steady. Calm. Not loud, not accusatory, just there. The simplicity of the statement carried authority. He hesitated, then nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I started slowly, laying out the facts. These are dates, places, messages, photos. Every single instance where the story you told me about your late mother's ring was false. I let the words hang, letting the room absorb them, letting them sink in. He opened his mouth, probably to deny, to charm, to deflect, but I anticipated that. I went on. I started showing the printed photos first. The ring on his hand, the ring on hers, the dates aligned with his supposed work schedule, juxtaposed against images of him with her. Each piece was methodical, each piece undeniable. There was no emotion in my presentation, only clarity. He faltered, and that faltering told me more than any words could. The room was quiet now. Everyone watching, listening, sensing the tension, sensing the collapse of the image they'd been shown for months. I could see his eyes darting to friends, trying to find support, trying to find an ally, trying to find a lifeline. But my allies were there, calm and composed, ready to affirm what I had gathered. He realized, maybe for the first time, that this was orchestrated, that I had control, that his deception was no longer hidden. "You," he started, voice tight, controlled, but trembling under the surface. "This, how did you?" His words trailed off, swallowed by the enormity of the evidence. I let him struggle. I let the silence speak louder than any accusation I could make. I continued. I presented messages, conversations that proved premeditation, pre-planned meetings, intimate moments shared with her that he had claimed were either work or family obligations. Each revelation landed with a subtle, surgical precision. My tone never rose. My hands never shook. I remained, throughout the eye of the storm, composed, meticulous, untouchable. He was panicking now. I could see it, the quick, shallow breaths, the flick of his eyes from me to the audience, the tiny tremor in his jaw. He had underestimated me. He had assumed that even if I discovered something, I wouldn't act, wouldn't organize, wouldn't execute. He had been wrong. And watching him try to regain control was satisfying. "You don't understand," he said finally, trying to grasp the narrative, trying to reshape reality to suit his ego. No, I interrupted softly, decisively. "You don't get to explain. Not tonight. Not here. Not to me." I let the words linger. Simple, final. The authority in my voice was unmistakable. The people in the room, my allies included, recognized it. His attempts to charm faltered completely when I revealed the corroborating details. The mutual friends who had observed his lies, the restaurant confirmations, the subtle patterns he had left behind, thinking I would never see them. Each piece of evidence I laid out was like a brush stroke, painting a picture of truth that he could not hide from, could not distort, could not manipulate. He looked around the room now, desperate, trying to gauge the reaction of others. But that too was part of the plan. Everyone could see him for what he was. A man caught in his own web of lies, floundering under the weight of undeniable proof. No clever smile, no charm, no rehearsed excuse could salvage the situation. I paused, letting the tension peak. "I trusted you," I said, voice calm, almost serene. "I believed in you. And this," I gestured to the folder, the images, the messages, the compiled proof, "is the reality you chose." My eyes locked with his. I saw the shame, the panic, the realization of how deeply he had miscalculated me. He thought he could control, manipulate, charm his way out. But I had seen it all, I had mapped it all, I had planned it all. No one spoke. The room held its collective breath, watching a man confronted not by rage or spectacle, but by precision. My calm, deliberate approach left him unarmed emotionally. His panic was silent but visible. Every twitch, every gulp, every avoided eye contact a testament to the trap he had walked into. I continued, presenting the final piece, the chronological alignment of all events. Dates he had claimed to work late, moments he had shared with me, juxtaposed against photos and messages proving the opposite. The narrative was airtight. My evidence wasn't just compelling, it was undeniable. He opened his mouth again, searching for any way out. I waited. I let the room watch. I let him flail silently, impotent, as the culmination of months of planning, observation, and strategic patience fell around him like the final dominoes in a carefully set pattern. Finally, defeated, he slumped slightly, realizing the enormity of what was happening. I didn't gloat. I didn't scream. I simply folded the folder, set it on the table, and looked around the room. Every person there understood the truth, whether they had realized it before or not. The man they thought they knew had been laid bare. The reality of his deception was crystal clear. And in that moment, I felt a strange clarity, a calm satisfaction that had nothing to do with malice. I had acted with purpose. I had controlled the narrative. I had exposed the truth without losing myself in rage or spectacle. That, I realized, was more powerful than any dramatic scene he might have expected. He looked at me finally, eyes wide, searching for a spark of the woman he thought he could manipulate, the one he had believed would crumble, cry, or beg. But she was gone. In her place stood a woman composed, intelligent, and unshakable. He understood that now, more viscerally than words could ever convey. "I didn't," he started, but the words didn't matter. They never would. The damage was done. Not through shouting, not through chaos, but through the meticulous unveiling of truth, executed with patience, precision, and poise. I smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. Not a smile of victory, but of completion. The confrontation had been executed exactly as I had planned. He had been caught off guard, his control stripped away, his lies laid bare. And I had remained throughout composed, calm, and in command. The room slowly resumed its rhythm, conversations tentatively restarting, but now tinged with the understanding that the man they thought they knew had been revealed for what he was. I didn't need applause. I didn't need cheers. I had made my point, and that was enough. Later, when I left, I felt lighter. The confrontation had not been easy. It had been tense, deliberate, and emotionally charged, but it had been necessary. He had underestimated me, misjudged me, and assumed he could manipulate the world around me without consequence. He had learned, painfully and publicly, that his assumptions were wrong. And I, for the first time in months, allowed myself a small, private sense of satisfaction. Not revenge for the sake of revenge, not cruelty for the sake of cruelty, but justice, precision, accountability. The confrontation was over. But I knew one thing for certain. This was a turning point. He would never underestimate me again. And as I walked away, I carried with me the quiet, unshakable power of a woman who had planned, waited, and executed with flawless precision. Because sometimes the greatest confrontations aren't about yelling or chaos. They're about watching the truth unfold while you remain unshaken, composed, and completely in control. The morning of the revelation felt surreal. I woke up with a strange sense of calm that I hadn't felt in months. A quiet assurance that what I had meticulously planned was about to unfold exactly as I envisioned. I had spent weeks, no, months, collecting proof, studying patterns, and orchestrating the timing, and now the moment had arrived. There was a thrill in that, not the kind that comes from anger, but the kind that comes from knowing that justice, subtle and precise, is about to play itself out. I arrived at the venue early, as I had planned, carrying the folder with all my evidence. Every photo, every message, every timeline, everything neatly organized and ready to present. The folder felt heavier than it was, laden not with paper, but with truth, with the weight of every lie he had ever told, every promise he had broken, every ounce of trust he had shattered. I wasn't just exposing him. I was reclaiming myself. People began to arrive for what they thought was a simple, polite engagement gathering. I greeted a few friends quietly, making sure they understood the subtle cues. No one knew exactly what was about to happen, but the energy in the room shifted as I walked in, calm, collected, radiating a quiet authority. I had rehearsed my presence as carefully as I had rehearsed my words. Confidence, not arrogance. Calm, not cruelty. That balance was essential. He arrived as expected, wearing that smug smile that always betrayed his ego. He had no idea what was coming. He thought the evening would be about light-hearted celebration, not the dismantling of his carefully constructed image. I could see it in the way he scanned the room, nodding at people, shaking hands, oblivious to the storm about to hit him. I waited until everyone had settled, until the chatter had softened into polite murmurs. Then I stood. I didn't shout, I didn't raise my voice. I simply asked for attention. The room, sensing the subtle authority in my tone, quieted immediately. Heads turned, eyes focused, and the moment of truth began. "Thank you all for coming tonight." I began, my voice steady, calm, and clear. "I asked everyone to be here not for celebration, but because there is something that needs to be addressed. Something that affects more than just one person." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. The subtle pause drew every eye in the room toward me, including his. I opened the folder and began to lay out the evidence carefully, methodically. First, the photos, the ring on my finger, the ring on hers. Dates meticulously noted, times and locations clearly documented. I moved through the timeline slowly, ensuring that every person in the room understood the pattern of deception. This wasn't about drama, it was about clarity. He began to shift, a flicker of panic in his eyes. He tried to intervene, to explain, to charm his way out of the situation, but I anticipated him. I held up a hand, politely but firmly. "Please let me finish. You will have your chance to speak once the facts are clear." The room held its breath. Friends, family, colleagues, they all leaned in, sensing the gravity of the moment. As I moved through the evidence, the room reacted. Gasps, murmurs, subtle exchanges of looks between friends and family. Each reaction reinforced the impact, and I could see the color drain from his face. He realized fully that he had been outmaneuvered. Every lie, every manipulation, every betrayal laid bare for everyone he cared about to see. Then came the messages, texts, emails, intimate conversations that left no room for misinterpretation. I read excerpts aloud, carefully chosen for clarity, not for humiliation. I wanted truth to be undeniable, not spectacle. Each word, each phrase, a thread unraveling the narrative he had spent months carefully constructing. The audience could see the disparity between his claims and reality. His control over the story had slipped through his fingers, and he knew it. I watched as he tried to maintain composure, but it was futile. Every attempt to smile, to explain, to charm, faltered under the weight of the evidence. Friends and family exchanged glances, some sympathetic, some shocked, all aware now of the deception. His carefully curated image, the one he had shown to everyone, crumbling in real time. I paused, letting the silence stretch, allowing the truth to resonate. Then I spoke again, softer this time, but with unwavering authority. "I trusted you. I believed in you. And this," I gestured to the folder, the photos, the messages, the undeniable proof, "is the reality you chose. Every decision, every lie, every moment you thought you could deceive me. This is the consequence." The room was still. He was still. Everyone was absorbing the magnitude of the revelation. The power of the moment was not in my words alone, but in the calm certainty with which I delivered them. I had planned every step, anticipated every response, and executed with precision. He finally spoke, voice tight, strained, almost pleading. It's not what it looks like." The attempt was pathetic, transparent. Everyone saw it. I shook my head gently, almost with pity. "It's exactly what it looks like. And now everyone knows." I could feel the satisfaction rising, subtle but undeniable. Not the cruel satisfaction of vengeance, but the deep, resonant satisfaction of justice executed with clarity. He had underestimated me, assumed I would crumble, assumed I would remain silent. He had been wrong. I was not just exposing him. I was asserting my own power, reclaiming my dignity, and redefining the narrative that had been manipulated for too long. I watched him falter, the panic visible in his eyes. He looked around, desperately seeking allies, support, validation, but there was none. The room understood the truth. His words, his charm, his explanations had no weight here. I had orchestrated the revelation perfectly. He was cornered by reality, and there was no escape. As the initial shock settled into quiet acknowledgement, I allowed myself a moment to reflect. This was not just about exposing a man who had deceived me. It was about reclaiming myself. Every lie he told, every promise he broke, had been an attempt to control me, to manipulate my perception, to shape reality to suit his whims. But in orchestrating this revelation, I had taken that control back. I had rewritten my story. I looked around the room, at friends and family, at the subtle nods and glances of understanding. They weren't just witnessing his downfall. They were witnessing my empowerment. The irony was palpable. The man who had controlled the narrative, who had believed himself untouchable, now had no agency. He was reduced not by anger or spectacle, but by clarity, precision, and the unshakable presence of a woman who refused to be deceived. He finally spoke again, more quietly this time, voice tinged with desperation. I didn't mean for it to. I held up a hand, cutting him off gently but firmly. Intentions don't undo actions. Words don't erase lies. You made your choices. And now you face the consequences, in full view of everyone who matters. The room remained quiet, absorbing the weight of the truth. And in that quiet, I felt a profound sense of closure. Months of doubt, pain, and betrayal had culminated in this precise, orchestrated moment. I had faced the deception head-on, executed my plan with composure, and now the truth stood unchallenged before everyone who mattered. I could see it in his eyes, the realization, the acknowledgement, the understanding that he had lost control. And in that moment, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt liberated, empowered. The revelation had not only exposed him, but had also affirmed my own strength, intelligence, and resilience. As the evening continued, conversations resumed, but the energy had shifted. People were no longer focused on the celebration alone. They were aware of the truth, aware of the deliberate orchestration, aware of the power of clarity and composure. And I quietly observed. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need applause. The evidence, the presentation, the execution had spoken for me. Later, when I left the room, the sense of liberation stayed with me. The confrontation had been precise, calculated, and public, and the consequences had unfolded exactly as I had planned. He had faced the truth, fully and publicly, and I had reclaimed my power without resorting to chaos or anger. Walking away, I felt a profound sense of pride, not in humiliating him, not in vengeance, but in asserting my own agency, in demonstrating that I was not a passive character in anyone else's story. I had observed, calculated, and acted. I had executed with precision, and in that execution, I had found not just closure, but empowerment. Because sometimes the most satisfying revelations are not about anger or revenge. They are about truth, clarity, and the quiet, unshakable assertion of your own worth. And as I looked back one last time, I knew the story had changed. He was no longer in control. I was. The morning after the revelation, I woke up in my own home, the kind of deep, unhurried sleep that comes only after the storm has passed. There were no alarms, no phone calls, no texts demanding explanations or apologies. Just quiet, just me. And for the first time in months, that quiet felt like freedom. I made coffee, slow and deliberate, savoring the warmth of the cup in my hands. The sun was just starting to filter through the blinds, casting patterns across the floor, and I felt a small, almost imperceptible smile tug at my lips. This was my morning, my space, my life reclaimed. The last few months of deception, betrayal, and careful planning had ended, and I had emerged intact, whole, and even stronger. I reflected on everything. The shock of seeing that ring on her finger, the months of gathering evidence, the planning, the confrontation, and finally the public revelation. It had been a journey through anger, grief, frustration, and fear, but also one of clarity, patience, and empowerment. I had discovered something fundamental. No one has the right to steal your peace, to manipulate your perception, to twist your reality. And if they do, you have every right to take it back calmly, deliberately, without sacrificing your dignity. In the quiet of my kitchen, I thought about him. The man who had once held my trust, who had once convinced me that a story about a late mother's ring was truth. I didn't feel hatred now, not really. I felt pity. Pity for the arrogance, for the overconfidence, for the failure to recognize that lies are fragile constructs that crumble under scrutiny. He had lost control of the narrative, and in that loss, I had regained control of my own life. I reflected on the irony of it all. He had believed himself clever, untouchable, and untarnished in the eyes of his social circle. But in underestimating me, he had revealed himself fully. And in the process, I had shown myself fully. Not the woman broken by betrayal, but the woman capable of strategy, composure, and unflinching self-respect. I realized that empowerment is rarely loud. It is quiet, precise, and deliberate. It does not announce itself with drama or chaos. It simply exists in the clarity of action and the reclaiming of one's own story. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about the people who had witnessed the revelation, the friends, family, colleagues, and even acquaintances. They had seen him falter, and they had seen me stand steady. I realized that my strength wasn't just about exposing his deceit. It was about showing others, and more importantly myself, that integrity, composure, and courage matter. That even in the face of betrayal, you can remain grounded, calculated, and dignified. I thought about my future, now untethered from the weight of a toxic relationship. The possibilities stretched out before me like a blank canvas, waiting for me to paint them. There were no apologies to accept, no explanations to dissect, no illusions to maintain. Just me, free to make choices, free to rebuild, free to redefine what happiness and trust would look like in my life. And for the first time in a long time, that freedom felt real. I reflected on what I had learned about people, and about myself. About people, lies, deception, and betrayal are not always obvious, but patterns exist. The truth is always there if you look for it carefully. And while some will hide behind charm and false narratives, the consequences of their choices eventually surface. As for myself, I am resilient. I am intelligent. I am capable of patience, strategy, and precise execution. I am worthy of honesty, respect, and love, and I will not settle for anything less. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes in my world. Friends reached out, offering support, admiration, and even small congratulations for how I had handled everything. It was not vanity that felt satisfying, but validation that my approach had been effective, composed, and true to my principles. People noticed, and that recognition reinforced the lesson I had already learned. You do not need to seek vengeance to reclaim your power. You simply need to act with clarity and integrity. I returned to routines I had neglected. Reading in the mornings, walks through the park, long conversations with friends who understood my journey. I laughed more freely, slept more soundly, and carried myself with a lightness I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The toxic weight of someone else's lies was gone, and with it came a sense of rebirth. I also reflected on love. Not the kind that deceives, but the kind that respects, cherishes, and uplifts. I realized that my future relationships would be different. I would recognize patterns early, trust my instincts, and maintain boundaries without hesitation. I had learned that love is not about blind faith, but about partnership built on honesty, communication, and mutual respect. And if that wasn't present, I would walk away. Not angrily, not bitterly, but with quiet certainty and self-respect intact. There was also humor in the aftermath, if I allowed myself to see it. The man who once thought himself untouchable had lost control entirely. The irony was delicious. I didn't need to gloat or remind him, he already knew. The lesson had been delivered, the narrative had shifted, and he was left to reconcile his choices with reality. And I was free to enjoy the subtle, understated satisfaction of truth and justice realized without losing my composure. As the weeks passed, I allowed myself moments of reflection. I journaled about everything, the anger, the planning, the execution, the aftermath. Writing helped me process, helped me consolidate the lessons, helped me appreciate the strength I had discovered within myself. I realized that my journey had been as much about self-discovery as it had been about addressing betrayal. I had discovered patience, foresight, and resilience I hadn't fully acknowledged before. I also began to dream again. Not in a distracted, naive way, but in a grounded, purposeful way. I considered new opportunities, personal goals, and experiences I had postponed for far too long. Travel, classes, new hobbies, even small indulgences that I had denied myself while trapped in the web of his deceit. The freedom I felt wasn't just emotional. It was practical, tangible, and liberating. In quiet moments, I smiled at the lessons learned. I had faced betrayal, orchestrated a precise confrontation, and witnessed the truth unfold exactly as planned. And now, in the stillness after the storm, I had reclaimed my life. I had reasserted my self-worth, my dignity, and my power. I had shown myself that even in the darkest moments of deceit and heartbreak, a composed, intelligent, and patient response could create transformation. Not just for others, but for myself. Looking back, I realized that the journey had been as empowering as the outcome. The betrayal had forced me to confront not just him, but myself, my limits, my strengths, my resilience. And through it all, I had emerged not bitter or broken, but renewed, stronger, and confident in my ability to navigate life with clarity and composure. And so I moved forward, one day at a time, one choice at a time. I carried the lessons with me, but left the anger behind. I rebuilt my routines, nurtured my friendships, and opened myself to the possibility of happiness on my own terms. The past, with all its lies and deception, remained behind me. The future was mine to shape, free from manipulation, free from dishonesty, free from the weight of someone else's control. I smiled to myself as I sipped my evening tea. Life had returned, not as it had been, but better, clearer, freer, more honest. I was no longer defined by his choices, his lies, or his narrative. I was defined by my resilience, my intelligence, and my courage. And in that, I found true closure. Not through revenge alone, but through empowerment. Not through bitterness, but through self-respect. Not through spectacle, but through the quiet assertion of my own worth. I had reclaimed my story, my life, my dignity, and that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all.